Since the inception of conservatism as a philosophical movement, from the time of Burke onwards, the conservative has been placed at a disadvantage in the face of the aggressive ideologist with whom he is in opposition. The problem for the conservative is that a warm love of tradition does not provide the required heroic passion which would drive them to seek out the dangers to the conservative position, nor does it give him the ruthless mindset needed to extirpate them. Instead, the conservative believes that things can be left to run themselves as the world closes in and little by little consumes the good things they possess. Fundamentally, the issue is one of doctrine. The conservative has no method of describing that which he seeks to bring about, because it lies outside of the limits of his vision. Traditions cannot be prescribed a priori, only described a posteriori. It cannot be predicted what the traditions of the future will look like. It can only be explained what the traditions of the past have been. The aesthetic sense and appreciation of the traditions cannot be predicted in advance, only enjoyed in the moment, and conserved for those who come next. And no one person can act as the prophet of conservatism, in the same way one can have a prophet of ideology, like Rousseau, Marx, or Mill. For the conservative, there is no rationalistic deduction from first principles to which the circumstances of the real world can be subtracted to calculate the necessary political acts which will bring reality into better alignment with the ideology. The conservatives' metric for success is how they feel about the place in which they live, which can only be known after it has been experienced. The conservative is therefore blind to the future, and this gives ideologists a monopoly on progress. The conservative cannot dictate that which should be, because everything they appreciate was made from the combined and unplanned acts of a multitude of individuals and communities over a span of many generations. The natural rhythm of life cannot be crystallized into a doctrine and taught to future generations in order to bring about in them a wholesome affection for their own civilization. Moreover, the ideologist has an inherent advantage here, because he is promising something that does not exist, whereas the conservative is promising something that does. The problem with promising something which does exist, in opposition to the fantastical promises of ideologists, is that the thing that exists has had the opportunity to manifest its flaws, and so the ideologist's rebuttal can be based on the observable reality. However, the conservative has no such ability because the ideologist is promising things that have not yet come to pass, and therefore have not yet manifested their flaws, and any flaws that could be deduced from what they've proposed can be wished away through optimistic reasoning. Without a well-articulated doctrine to expound, the conservative defends his own position with futile desperation as ideologists continually chip away at the thing he seeks to preserve. And at the same time, there can be no articulated conservative doctrine to advance such a state of affairs into the future. This is the conundrum that the conservative face, and which appears to be no escape. Creating a doctrine of tradition destroys the concept of tradition by reducing it to a static, unchanging, a priori ideological formula. And absent an ideological formula, the conservative is doomed to lose, but in creating an ideological formula, he destroys that which he set out to preserve. Deprived of a definite normative doctrine that aggressively prescribes how the world should be, the conservative is unable to make gains against his ideological opponents, whereas they are able to make gains against him. Inevitably then, the conservative faces gradual defeat. So what is to be done? Well, it seems that we only have a few options. First option is to reject the Whig paradigm entirely, but this means rejecting Enlightenment liberal ideals such as individual rights, democracy, and the concept of natural rights. It seems like an untenable proposition, and it also seems to leave us with the only option of re-establishing feudalism and returning to a monarchical style of government, which doesn't seem likely or desirable, even if it did seem likely. So the conservative must begin from the position that he is in. What is it that we, the oikos, want? I would suggest that we could consider rooting our conservative demands in aesthetics. That is, how we feel about the country we are in. Now, you might wonder, why would this be considered legitimate? But why should it be any less legitimate than any activism the left has done in the last decade? All of their demands are rooted in how they feel about things as well. How they feel about race relations, how they feel about men and women and gender identity, how they feel about what people say to them, how they feel oppressed. The very concept of something being offensive is an aesthetic response to non-aesthetic stimuli. If that is considered legitimate, then our aesthetic demands are legitimate as well. The positives about this perspective are that it begins with our innate instincts about the place in which we live, which is naturally informed by the continuity of tradition that we have inherited. It does not require an a priori plan to reformat the country in particular ways. It allows us to simply highlight those things that offend our senses and provides us with suggestions in ways in which these particular things should be changed. From this perspective, there are actually many places we can go to which would begin to transform this country into something we want, and many of us actually remember. For example, we can begin with Brexit. Why should we support Brexit? Well, because it feels right that Britain should be a sovereign country, of course. There is no need to get into the weeds about trade deals or mundane questions of daily politics. This is about the general teleology of this country. Britain should not be beholden to foreign interests, it should not be under the jurisdiction of foreign courts, and it should not be part of some kind of international superstate. The British state should be beholden to the British people, and decisions about Britain should be made in Britain. Anything else simply feels illegitimate. How about John Cleese's statement that London is not an English city? He's right. It's not. It's mostly populated by non-English people, which gives the city a non-English aesthetic. This is a good reason to cease immigration. The UK sees a gross immigration of over 1 million people a year, but it also sees a remigration of approximately 400,000 foreigners every year. If immigration were to be halted, remigration would steadily empty the country of foreigners until our cities felt native again. Next could be our buildings. Tucker Carlson recently pointed out that none of the politicians of the West ever talk about beauty, and when you look at our cities, you can see why. If conservatives want to talk about what should be built and what should be torn down, let's begin by demanding that the brutalist nightmares inflicted upon us by the left in the 1970s should be torn down and replaced with buildings that are built with traditional styles in mind. We want our cities to feel like they've been designed for human habitation and are not simply an exercise in cost efficiency for bureaucratic calculations. How about the laws under which we live? For instance, many people feel tyrannized by the current legislation about social media, specifically Section 127 of the 2003 Communications Act. This is the law that is criminalizing people for making Monty Python-style jokes and posting them on social media.
You can't have babies!
Don't you oppress me.
I'm not oppressing you, Stam. You haven't got a womb!
Does it not feel wrong that Brits can't post irreverent, silly and offensive jokes to social media? I think it does. And this legislation should be scrapped on those grounds. It makes the country feel wrong, and the people living in it feel unsafe when they want to share a joke. There are many other ways that we can approach the problems that our country faces through the lens of aesthetics, as it allows us to root our demands for change in the traditions and continuity of Britain, rather than having some kind of theoretical formula that we intend to apply to the country. It also limits the scope of intervention, while providing us with the positions from which we can push outwards against the ideologies that are ruining this country.